I'd like to welcome everybody to January's webinar from ACE Microtechnology. We're going to give it about one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started, but I appreciate everybody's attendance. Hang with us for about 60 more seconds and we'll get started. All right, looks like it's 12:01, so we'll get started. So again, welcome. This is ACE Micro's January webinar. This is the fourth in a series of 6 webinars that we've conducted, mostly for existing clients that are contemplating a move to from Great Plains to Business Central. So there were three prior seminars that we did towards the end of last year. Today's topic is going to be really all in and around data. So moving to BC, what about my data is the topic today. We've got I think a lot of good content to share with you today. So let's go ahead and get started. So let me progress my slides here. A couple of housekeeping items first. We have attendees muted at the time just to kind of control background noise. We have a lot of people in attendance, so we do have you muted. And we are recording this session. So if you want a copy of the recording, let us know. We'll happily send that out. If you need to share it with others that couldn't attend today, let us know. We'll send you a copy. The recordings are usually available. Worst case scenario by sometime tomorrow. If you have questions during the session, enter it into the question box within GoToWebinar, and I will do my best to try to respond to those questions. If I can't answer the questions myself, then we'll have a couple pauses during the program today to be able to answer those questions. So don't worry, we'll get to all of those as we need to. Again, the recording is available. Just request that if you would. And then a free data migration assessment is available to everybody who attended today. And we're going to be talking more about that, what that data migration assessment looks like and the results that are presented in the assessment itself. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. In today's program, we're going to be covering a couple things. One, I mentioned the data assessment. We'll review the results of that. I will be going over that content, probably take 10-15 minutes to do that. Then I'm going to pass it over to one of my colleagues who's going to be talking about really more the traditional migration that we're all used to, going from one accounting and ERP system to another. What does a traditional migration look like? And then also talk about how much data should you bring? What's reasonable and customary? So we'll touch on those things. And then for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to be looking at people that don't necessarily want to go through the time and expense of a traditional migration, maybe want more detail, but don't want to necessarily migrate all of that data. So some ways that you can access data from really more of a historical looked up approach. And so we have somebody that'll be joining us that I'll introduce shortly that will discuss those options as well. Again, the important message here is you do have options, okay? You have the ability to bring over as little or as much data as you want in various forms. So it really is up to you. It's up to your users as to what you want to do. But we'll be covering all of those things in today's session. So I want to start off, and if you can just kind of type your answers into the question section of GoToWebinar. I want to ask, how many GP companies do you have? So in GP, you have multiple companies. So you might have just one, you might have 50. So I want to ask the question of how many GP companies do you have is the first question. So if I can start getting some responses there, that would be great. All right. And along those lines, how many years of data do you have? So have you been using GP for 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 15 years? how much data do you have in these databases? How many years of data do you have? All right. And then lastly, when it comes to data, there's a couple ways that we can bring that over. We can bring it over in summary level, or we can bring it over in transactional level, detailed level. So as a preference, are you happy with summary level data, or gosh, I really, really, really need transactional level data, or maybe need transactional level data for a certain period back? Do me a favor, share your thoughts on that if you would. All right. So I'm seeing a lot of requests for transactional. Let's see. All right. Well, that gives it kind of across the board. I mean, I'm seeing lots of information across the board, which is pretty typical. I mean, again, we have clients that are anywhere from one company to multiple companies. Been on it for, most of our clients have probably been on GP, 8, 10, 12 years at least. And then there's always tends to be a preference for transactional level data. We'll talk about that more. It really comes down to, how much money you want to spend on data migration as to whether it makes sense to bring that over or not. And then again, we're going to be talking about another option today. So let's go ahead and move into the meat of the program then, and look at the data assessment and just kind of review those results that we get out of these data assessments. So the data assessment itself obviously requires we have access to your instance. And once we have access to your instance, which in most cases, if you're a client, we do, we run a script on your instance of GP. It takes about 15, 20 seconds really to complete. And then we get this, this wonderful amount of information back. And the screenshot that you're seeing now really talks about, it's really kind of a dashboard. It tells us, what are the migration risks? And in this scenario, we see 10 migration risks. And it kind of categorizes them into, okay, this is a pretty large risk. It's just a large risk, medium risk, small risk. And then we can kind of drill down into those as to what it's finding when it comes to risk and risk mitigation. Also, it identifies additional third-party ISVs, how many companies that you're running in GP, and what version, the version of Microsoft SQL you're on. And one of the things you need to know is in order to make this migration, you need to be on SQL 2016 or greater in order to make that migration. And then some of the the modules that you might use. So it goes into, okay, in your situation, you're definitely using GL, you're using AP, you're using, or excuse me, AR and payroll. So at a high level, it gives us some additional information. If you look over here on the left, you notice we're in the dashboard. Then we can drill into issues by category, detailed level migration risks, additional products, and then company details. So let's touch on that for a second if we could. So if you get into issues by category, you'll see that it calls out certain areas where it's seeing some challenges. And I've highlighted just a couple here. So customer phone numbers with alpha characters. A lot of us have a habit of putting in a phone number and then putting in X for extension 123. Well, that X is just not going to come over. So that's an issue, and we need to go through a process of cleaning that up. And the nice thing is we can provide some scripts. Well, one, we can tell you exactly where the issues are, which makes it easier. And two, if it's a lot of changes, sometimes we're able to provide some scripts in order to assist you in some of that data cleansing. Another one is item number length. The difference between GP and BC, you're restricted by characters in both systems. Well, in this situation, item IDs in BC can only be 20 or fewer characters. If you have inventory items in GP that are greater than 20 characters, then we need to discuss that and make some appropriate changes. So this is the kind of data that it gives us and the granularity it gives us of that data in the assessment. Moving on, migration risks. You'll see where it labeled them as high and medium. So a high risk, again, is that SQL version. You know, if we're not on a compatible version of SQL, then we're not able to do the migration. Now, there's things that we can do to get GP or up to SQL 2016. So it's not a huge challenge, but just know it is a challenge and we have to address that. You might have unbalanced workload transactions as a medium risk. So you've got unposted items out in GP that, you know, we need to get those posted prior to any sort of migration, or there's potential for that data being lost. So these are the types of things that we're looking at. These are the types of things that we report back to you. Third parties, you know, typically as your partner, we try to track those. But there's purchases that you made prior to us potentially being your partner that maybe we're not aware of. There's purchases that you made since we've been your partner that maybe we're not aware of. So this just gives us both validation that we know the third-party solutions that are out there. In this case, Green Shades, I'm assuming for probably 1099 reporting or W-2 reporting. SmartFill is out there. So we just know that we have these products that we need to address, and we need to make sure if they're business critical third-party ISVs that we have either the same or some sort of equivalent solution or capability on the BC side. And then lastly, we can kind of drill in by area. You know, if we want to take a look at some of the challenges that we have in data, you know, in the finance area, inventory, manufacturing, project accounting, you know, we can drill in the data assessment based on the functional area, the functional role within the solution. So a lot of great information that we're given, and you know, it gives us kind of a starting point of saying, okay, before any migration, we have to get this data cleaned up. You know, it's the old GIGO theory, garbage in, garbage out. If we're starting with a new system, we want it to be as clean as possible. So it gives us the opportunity to go through a data cleansing process prior to any sort of migration. And the end result is a much cleaner, much better solution when we do make the eventual migration over to Business Central. So hopefully that answers questions about that. Again, that tool is available to you. It's an assessment that we can do for free. So if that's something that you are interested in, let us know, and reach out to either me or reach out to your account manager here at ACE. Let us know. We can run that assessment and then schedule a time to review the results. All right, so that was everything on the data migration assessment tool. With that, I'm going to turn the next portion of the presentation over to one of my associates, Chris, and he's going to be talking about kind of more the traditional migration path that we take, you know, and that we're all used to. So he's going to be touching on that. And again, thanks again for joining us. I'll come back at the end for some Q&A, and we'll continue on with the program. Chris, it's all yours, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Can you just confirm that you're seeing my slides okay, Mark?
I can see it.
Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us on kind of the next step in our GP to BC journey. If you've been with us the last couple of months, we've talked about a lot of different topics. Today is kind of a big one in terms of data migration. So as Mark said on the assessment tool, that assessment really looks at your GP data, and some of those exceptions that he was going over is, you know, just how ready is that GP data to be migrated directly into Business Central. And there's obviously some structural considerations in terms of, you know, field lengths of different things that Mark just covered. But then there's also some others that, you know, you may want to change your chart of accounts, or you may want to change your vendor naming, or you may want to eliminate, you know, 20% of your vendors that are historical. You know, all those considerations go into a lot of these data migration choices. And what I'm going to be talking about for the next 15 minutes or so is, what is the traditional migration path from GP to BC? What do you get? You know, what's the kind of 80-20 rule, right? What does 80% of everybody do? And there's always going to be outliers and additional components. So I'm going to get a little more detailed and talk about a traditional data migration. And the first piece I'm going to talk about is what I call master records. And these are things that you can find under the cards menu in Dynamics GP, right? First up is general ledger accounts. If you were with us in our previous webinars, you know that GL accounts in Business Central are really the natural segment inside of Business Central. So the natural segment in GP is the GL account inside Business Central. So your segments, your additional segments, like your departments and so forth, are dimensions. So this is a master record component that is in the data migration path. Customer header and ship to addresses for customers. These are, if you have customers inside GP, all those considerations that the assessment tool gives you, you'll have to address any address lengths or anything like that, but those can be pulled directly from GP into Business Central. Likewise, on the payables side, the migration will also include vendors and purchasing addresses or additional vendor addresses. So if you're looking at your vendor card inside GP, you know you have named address IDs that may be a remit to or a purchase from. Those addresses will come over into Business Central. Inventory items, header level information from an inventory item perspective will migrate from GP into Business Central. Bank accounts, which are called checkbooks inside GP. So any checkbook master record data, meaning the checkbook ID, the name, the bank that it's associated with, all of that stuff that's on the checkbook maintenance window will come over directly into Business Central. Now before I get into transactional data, there are some other outliers. You may be thinking, well, what about fixed assets? Well, what about bill of materials if I'm a manufacturing client? What about projects if I'm using the projects module? All of those things can also be migrated as well, but I mean, we're talking kind of the 80-20 rule here. These are the basics that come over that almost everybody has. Okay, so from a transactional data standpoint, GL summary history, what we typically see is net change history on a period by period basis migrated to Business Central. And really the benefit of that is that you can do comparative financials for years in the past versus the current year that you're entering inside Business Central. So typically we do not see detailed general ledger transactions being migrated, meaning every journal entry. We will summarize and bring over the net change balances into Business Central. And this, if you were with your company when GP was implemented, this was probably a topic that you did in your kickoff meeting of your GP implementation. So it's the same methodology that we followed. Now, one thing to note here on the GL summary history is that if your data is extremely clean inside Dynamics GP, meaning I've reconciled it, I've done my check links process and my annual reconciliations, you can bring over as much history as you have in GP because everything is clean and tidy. And obviously there's other considerations such as changing chart of accounts and stuff like that. But this GL summary history, the main point I want to take away from is it's summary in nature. It's net change. You can still run comparative financials, but you're not having every single journal entry distribution inside Business Central. Open accounts receivable. This is a point in time migration of your open receivables. This is all of the open invoices, open credit memos that when summed and aggregated equal your aging. So this is essentially migrating your open aging report from Dynamics GP to Business Central. Likewise, on the payables side, we've got the open accounts payable, same thing, open invoices, open credit memos, any other open documents that are on vendor accounts that aggregate to your total aging will be migrated at point in time. And that point in time is the day before your go live date. From an inventory perspective, we're migrating inventory balances at point of time, and those balances do include cost layers if you're using FIFO, LIFO. So you will have embedded cost layers with your opening inventory balances, and this also includes those lots and serial numbers if you are tracking lots and serial numbers. If you do have multi-location, so you have multiple site IDs inside Dynamics GP, those balances will also be broken out by site ID and location. And lastly is our opening bank balances and unreconciled items. These are when you do your last reconciliation inside Dynamics GP. You probably know those reports that print out the unreconciled items and the last reconciled balance. You know, those are the figures that we bring over into Business Central so that we pick up exactly where the GP bank reconciliation process left off. You know, we've got a last reconciled balance, and then we have a list of all of the unreconciled items that are sitting in that bank ledger, ready to be reconciled on that next account reconciliation for the first month of BC. Okay, so this is typically what we see that goes into at least goes into the basic subledgers and general ledger of Business Central. Now, again, if you're using other subledgers inside GP, such as project, manufacturing, even field service, then obviously this will amend a little bit. Fixed assets is another. You'll have master records and transactional data for those modules as well. But this is the traditional approach and traditional inclusions in the data migration track. Now, in addition to that is some other considerations in terms of what I call historical lookups or reference information. So in our migration offering, we do offer historical reference information for the receivables subledger, the payables subledger, and then sales order and purchase order. And what I mean by that is if you're a GP user and you know what's in your receivables transactions smart list, which is basically just a dump, a list of all of the open, or not open, but all of the historical transactions, invoices, credit memos, debit memos, cash receipts, payments, so forth. We do bring over a snapshot of that data in reference, but it's extremely limited. It's really just the pedigree information for those transactions. And what I mean by that is document date, document description, customer ID, document amount, and due date. You know, very basic. Think of the original receivables transaction smart list that's in Dynamics GP. Now, does it give you a lot of detail? Not really. You can't see the distributions on it. However, you can see a reference of what invoices were on a customer, you know, for 3 years ago, you know, just as historical lookup. In addition to receivables transactions, we've also got payables transactions. Okay, and like I said, we have sales order header and line. So if you do want to see historical pricing that a customer received on a particular item, you can look up what that unit price was that you extended that customer. Likewise, if you want to look up historical purchase order line and costs from a particular vendor, you will have those lookups. But I want to stress that this is really reference only. And the point of these basic historical smart lists that get migrated into Business Central is so that you don't have to keep GP up and running. You don't have to keep manual Excel sheets in play. It's very basic lookup information. Now, for many people, this basic information is not enough, and we need more information available from a detailed standpoint. And that's really where Mary and Chris are going to talk to you about E1's offering that allows you to kind of keep your GP data in the cloud and accessible from within Business Central. And they can certainly talk more about that. So I think before I get too far into that, I'm going to let Mary and Chris talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and switch the presenters over.
Perfect.
And before Mary and Chris get started, I'm going to take a little quick pause here. I wanted to go over a little bit more detail on the questions that I posed in the survey section. Chris, you can hear me, correct?
Yep.
All right. So the questions that were posed were, how many companies do you have in GP? How many years of data? And then preference on summary or transactional level data. And I wanted to share some of the results here. We had one organization, 2 companies, 28 years of historical data and transactional. Let's see what we have here. 5 companies, 1 company, 2 companies, 1 company, 5 companies, and 10 years of data since 1999. So what are we looking at there? 24 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Another one here with 28 years. So we have 2 companies at 28 years, 1 company at 24 years. Let's see here, 15 years, 20 companies. And then when you get into the old, okay, let's see here, 5 to 6 companies, 8 years. And then the overwhelming preference is certainly transactional level data, which is something that, Chris kind of touched on here in a second, but I think Mary can touch on even more. So I don't see any more questions right now. I can open it up for questions, or we can save that to the end. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box here. So why don't we just go ahead, Mary, take over, and then we'll open it up and take people off unmute at the end for any additional questions. So Mary, it's all you.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody. Well, it's nice to be here with you all this morning / afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm Mary Truis. I work on the sales team here at E1. I've also got Chris Dew on the line, who's going to come on and talk for a minute after I give my little spiel here. But everything that Mark just listed is exactly what we're seeing at E1. I recognize a lot of E1 usernames in the attendee list here today. I see some Smart Connect users, some SmartList Builder users, so I know that you guys are familiar with us from a GP perspective. We've been in the GP business forever. Chris Dew specifically has been, with GP for a very long time, most of his career working at Great Plains, Microsoft, and E1. So we know and love GP, and we are seeing, tons of people moving over to Business Central from GP as they want to get moved into a cloud ERP system. And we saw a huge gap in the migration process for our GP users because of how well we know GP inside and out. We've had our traditional migration and integration tool, Smart Connect, for many years. So exactly what Chris was talking about here, with the traditional migration, taking your data as it is and getting that loaded into Business Central where it exists there. That leaves a big gap in that detailed transactional data, because that's extremely hard to do from a traditional integration perspective. And it takes a long time and it can be costly. That's why we have PopDoc to help you. PopDoc is on the other end of that migration spectrum, where we are simply sharing data and putting it in a meaningful place for people. People want to see all their GP historical transactional data, but it doesn't really need to exist in Business Central. It needs to be viewed in Business Central. So we'll talk a little bit about that today and what that looks like. So as you can see here, we've got that migration to Business Central idea, right? We have the GP migration tool that Microsoft came up with to transfer your existing data to the cloud. Like I said, it leaves a lot to be desired there. When we talk about moving to Business Central, we know that our GP users have some things to contend with to get it to BC. PopDoc is that intermediary where we can connect all of your data, your third-party data, maybe even data that doesn't belong in GP today. Maybe you were looking at another system for data and dumping it to Excel and working with it that way, and you'd love to see that mixed in with your old GP data and your new BC data. We can do that with PopDoc. I'm going to share a little graphic here on what we see as the migration story. We are able to connect to GP, and that is everything that exists in GP, including all your SmartList Builder and even SmartList Designer lists that you painstakingly built out over the last 28 years with your 200 companies or whatever we heard in there. We're able to get all of that data easily into the Azure Data Lake for really inexpensive and easily managed storage. Then we can use PopDoc to connect to that, format that data how you want to see it, and view and display it right inside Business Central. It makes a lot more sense for all of your users to use it that way. And I know a lot of you are at the beginning stages of this. You're considering a move to Business Central, or you're right at the start of it. But I think it would be really helpful if we had Chris Dew show you a little bit about how that works. So I am going to stop sharing here, give presenting to Chris Dew, and let him show you a little bit about how it goes.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary.
And we are
Okay.
seeing your screen.
You are, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, very good. I think what I'll do is I'm actually going to start right inside of Business Central, right? Because that's where you're going to be spending, that'll be your new home, where your data is. And I want to show you just what we've done to make sure that that transition works really well for you. So you see we have PopDoc embedded and right inside of here. This is really your smart lists that you've had in the GP world, right? What we brought you, Smart List Builder, all those years ago. This is those same smart lists that you have inside of here. So you can interact with Business Central. This happens to be a Business Central list. I can, interact with that. I can quickly add columns. I can, I can group by things if I want to see totals, subtotals by vendor. I can have an unlimited amount of filters working with this data, right? So no more four filters in a smart list. Now you can have as many as you like right inside of here. You can quickly switch an and to an or and do some really fun things like that. But what I wanted to show you is that it doesn't have to be just live Business Central data. What we're talking about is that historical data here. And so what I'm showing you, this is something that we ran through our process to move all of your smart lists that you had in your old system. And additionally, we can archive your entire database. So we'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to pull up one list. You can see I have a bunch of historical type lists that are in here, right? Some of the things that the other Chris on the call here was talking about that, don't necessarily come over by default. All those historical payables transactions or receivables or sales, some of those things are not necessarily part of the default package. But I'm going to show you something interesting here. When I click on this list, this is doing something kind of unique. This is actually pulling not only the history from Dynamics GP, right? I actually could turn that server off and I'm still able to access that, but it's also returning the live information from Business Central. So what is this list? This is a list of all of the line items that we've sold to our customers. So right now you can see I have a source connector on here. This is stuff coming from live Business Central. But if I go a few hundred records into here, what you'll see is this is stuff that I've archived from my Dynamics GP system. So I have a really cool thing that I can add lists from multiple places. And now I have one place to look for all of that history to see all of my sales line history. But let's take it a step further. What I want to show you again is that we could switch just any of these other history lists, or even Mary talked about, we could hook into other systems, right? So now your smart lists that you used to for GP, you can hit all types of data and see that, in this case, e-commerce information right inside of Business Central. But what I want to show you is, I think in this historical aspect, oftentimes instead of wanting to see all of the data, right? Again, I heard 28 years of GP data. Again, somebody that's actually has data older than I've been, been working with GP, so that's impressive. But oftentimes you want to see that more contextually. So that means on the customer. Here's our old buddy Aaron Fitz. We have all of Aaron Fitz's history embedded right on the card inside of Business Central. So what's significant about this? Well, this is all done without writing any code at all. It's simply part of a PopDoc solution that you can embed any type of data on any page inside of Business Central. And what's unique about this now is this is very similar to the list I showed you before, where I have some Business Central data, and then also after we go past the first few records, it's all GP data. Well, this is the same list, but you'll see that it only has 125 records because this is only Aaron Fitz, right? This isn't all the customers. This is just Aaron Fitz, and Aaron doesn't have very many transactions in the new BC system. It has most of the history coming from the old Dynamics GP. So just to show you that we can bring just that data, whether it's a customer, a vendor, an inventory item, or an account, right? We can basically pull all that into wherever you need to see this information. And again, you can still filter it. You can still add, if there's any additional columns, I can add those columns on that list. So you have all those capabilities. What you may be asking now is, well, how do you actually go about moving that data? So I'm going to show you very, very quickly this next little part. We have an awesome tool that you can run on site. You basically will log into your PopDoc account, which is, again, this is the world's a cloud-based world now. So it's logging me in. And then the next thing it's going to ask me for is where I want to store the data. So Mary mentioned data lakes. We've found them really cost effective and a fast way of accessing the data. So I'm going to pick my data lake I have here. Again, doesn't even matter if you're on one of the later versions of GP, or again, we have stuff all the way back to GP9 right now. So we have all of those coded in for any of the special things that might be in there. If you do have an older version, we can probably talk and probably can get your data. But just to tell you for now, that's what we have. So then you're running this on premise, right? You're going to hook it at your database. And we're basically then going to choose which companies. So again, if somebody had 20 companies or 200 companies or whatever it was, you can choose which ones you want to archive. You may have some test companies that it doesn't make sense, right? They were there for a while, but you're not using anymore. Or maybe there's a company that again is defunct and you're no longer need to archive that. You can choose what you want to archive and not. And then finally, it allows you to pull all the lists. So every smart list that you have inside of there, not just a couple, right? We're pulling every smart list, every column, and more. And then even if you've done ones with like Smart List Builder or even Baby Smart List Builder from Microsoft, the designer that they did, if you built stuff in there, we can actually bring over those lists as well. And so again, I won't go through the whole process, but you'll see now it's going to start the process of doing this for every company. It'll tell me, what I have left, what's been completed. If there's any failures along the way, it'll tell me that whole process. So this is a really awesome process that we have to archive all of your GP data, and more importantly, without writing any code or having to have a developer involved every time, making it available for you right inside of the Business Central interface so that you can access that data for your end users. So I think I'll wrap my part up there and pass it on to whoever needs it next.
So Chris, this is Mark at ACE. We did have one question that came in.
Okay.
From an attendee today. What if you never use smart lists? Can you still have access to your historical data?
Yeah. Oh, great question. So what I had showed inside of here, and maybe let me just cancel this process real quick. If we go back here, that was the smart list, but you can always copy the entire database too. So if you point it this way, it changes the game up a little bit. It doesn't do anything with the smart lists or the views or anything like that. This is basically going directly at the database and saying we're going to grab all the tables and views in there and we're going to archive that to the data lake. So yeah, if you don't want the smart lists, the thing I'll say about smart lists is they give you the more human, readable or friendly names for the fields in there. They match what you would see inside of GP.
Right.
And so oftentimes it's much easier to work with the data that way.
So it's really a matter of how you digest the data, and it's just easier to do with smart list than it is and just having access to the entire table, correct?
Typically what we do, we actually have people run both. So one that they're going to work with their lists, probably which has the most common ones that they would be using today, whether it's payables, transactions, or sales line items. And then we have, I call it the insurance policy. but you run the tables or the entire database so that you have just in case, right? Maybe you're a year down the road and go, oh, we're missing some field. So you would have the capability of quickly adding that to your existing list and get whatever missing field that you had. So that, for me, it's kind of you do both of them and then you're fully covered.
All right, perfect. Well, Chris, we appreciate that. Was there anything else you needed to cover today?
No,
I think that's good.
I think I'd like to hammer something home that Chris and Mary both covered, and it really goes to the requirement of I need my transactional data. You know, I need my GP transactional data, and I think the thing to think about is I understand that is a completely reasonable request, but to get at the root of it, I think the business function or the need for having your transactional data is not so much that it has to be in Business Central. It's that I have to be able to view it. I have to be able to see the details of it. And Chris, if you wouldn't mind just Xing out of that window and going back to that customer card that's right behind it, I think this illustrates it really, really well, where with a product like PopDoc, this is a customer card inside Business Central for Aaron Fitt, right? But you're actually you're viewing that transactional detail that resides both inside Business Central as well as inside Dynamics GP that may or may not be offline, right? You may have thrown the server away 6 months ago, okay? It might be in the trash heap, but the data is captured and archived in the cloud and it's available. You can see that row that Chris Dew has selected right there came from Dynamics GP, but the invoice right above it, or the invoice line right above it, came from Business Central. Now, if you wanted to do this the traditional way and bring in transactional data directly into the BC tables, you know, it has a spider web effect, right? If we're going to enter in an order into Business Central, that order is going to have to be linked to an invoice. An invoice is created. That invoice can then update the general ledger with revenue, tax, liability, accounts receivable, all of that stuff. It splinters out from there. Then there's a cash receipt that needs to be applied to that invoice, right? Now you have another subledger that you introduce into the story of this invoice. So now you have a bank transaction. All of these things have to match in order to traditionally bring in transactional detail. And you can think over 24 years how difficult of a process that is to get all of our receivables history into Business Central the traditional way. And this is really where the PopDoc value is. It shortcuts all of those traditional transactional data migration challenges and gives you just the value, which is what you're seeing on your screen right here, right? You have the detail right in front of you from your GP data that went in the trash, you know, 6 months ago, but it's still there, it's accessible, and I still get the business value out of having it.
Fantastic. So I'm going to
Thanks,
unmute
Chris.
all of the participants right now because we have a couple follow-on questions. So let me unmute that. And I think it was Anna that had a follow-on question. Anna, do you want to pose that to Chris from E1?
Yeah. Just if you don't have SmartList currently, would you recommend us creating certain ones to make it easier to see the data in PopDoc?
Well, some of them are kind of like just really standard ways of using the data. So if it was around like GL history, like there's a SmartList called Account Transactions that basically gives you all of the details from your journals. So
That are already in there.
so that it may actually be what you're actually looking for, even though you weren't maybe traditionally using the SmartList inside of there. It basically has joined all the tables and everything in there to get you the information that's needed.
Oh, perfect.
All right, fantastic. And Susan, I think you had a follow-on comment, but I believe it was answered by Chris. Susan Libby.
Okay. I see the question. She said if they don't use SmartList. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question: is do the standard SmartList come over even if they're not using them today?
Yep. So yeah, they will. They're there again. They're just probably the best way for most of the GP users to be able to view that data with the names that they're used to seeing inside of the system. So that's why we do that pass, and then again we bring over all the tables. So if you're really adventurous and want to dig deep into the names of those tables and the columns in there that are a little cryptic sometimes, we give you options, I guess.
All right, fantastic. Were there any other questions from the group? Or if not, I can jump into a couple slides, close out today's session, and give everybody a few minutes of their day back. So any other questions at this point? All right. So with that, let me take over presentation again. And show my screen. So Chris, Mary, thank you so much. Certainly kind of shows you know, the options that we have out there and available to us, and it's something that we just need to have, you know, conversations to discuss what the needs of the organization are, and that will dictate what the most appropriate, you know, approach is going to be to, you know, what data we move over, how we move it over, and the tools that we use to do so. So, and that was the goal for us today, was to just kind of let you know about those options. So again, Mary, Chris, and Chris, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Let me get back into my slides. Let me get myself back into presentation mode. Let me get myself out of that mode. So we've concluded basically today's session, unless there's some more questions. If you do have more questions, shoot them to us. We'll follow up offline. Certainly happy to do so. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, this is a Lunch and Learn series that we started back in the fall. 6 sessions over a 6-month period. This was session 4. If you, for whatever reason, whoops, did not mean to do that, missed any of these earlier sessions where we talked about GP to BC, when's the best time to move, intro to BC for the GP user, reporting in BC, we did in December. If you were not at any of those sessions and you're interested in the content, let us know. We can send you the recordings to those sessions as well. Again, the recording for today's session will be available probably by tomorrow at the latest. Next month, in the month of February, we're going to be covering payroll. So if you're doing GP and using payroll and HR, you know, what are my options in Business Central? Because Business Central does not have a native payroll and HR solution, so we need to talk about that. And then in March, we're going to be finishing up the series here, and we're going to talk about workflow and the options you have in Business Central. So lots of workflow capabilities that are available to us. So look for emails from us in the coming weeks about those sessions. Final thoughts on today. Again, discuss and plan now. We've been talking about Business Central for a while, and it's amazing how much time has gone by. You know, as we've started these educational sessions on trying to introduce our clients to it, and thoughts and ideas. So discuss and plan now internally. You know, once you've had those internal discussions, reach out to here to us at ACE, and you know, we'll happily get engaged and start walking you through the process and what we're seeing, evaluating your options. The nice thing again is there's plenty of options, not just on when you move, how you move, but also the data that you move. And either way, again, ACE is going to support your final decision. If you want to stay on GP for the foreseeable future, then fantastic. If you want to discuss moving to GP tomorrow, or excuse me, BC tomorrow, wonderful. If you're somewhere between, we'll talk about that and support that as well. So just know that as your partner, we're here to support the business needs and what makes the most sense for the organization. With that, I will thank you all again for attending and wish you a wonderful afternoon. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. Have a great day. Take care.